In 1983, a person sits alone in a quiet lab, watching a dot spin around a clock face, waiting to feel something. The instructions were simple. Flick your wrist whenever you feel like it. Remember where the dot was the moment you first felt the urge. EEG electrodes were fixed to their scalp, recording every flicker of electrical activity happening inside their skull. The participant reported the moment the urge arrived. The clock never lied. The data was precise. Here is the result that changed everything. Brain activity began building nearly a full second before the person reported any conscious urge to move. Your brain had already started the process. The feeling of deciding came after. It arrived late to its own story. If your brain chose before you did, what exactly were you doing when you thought you were choosing? That question haunted neuroscience for decades. Then, one man decided to actually measure it. Before Libet, two German scientists named Kornhuber and Dicke discovered something strange in 1965. The brain produces a slow electrical buildup before any voluntary movement. They called it the Bereitschaftspotential, the readiness potential. Think of it like a pressure wave building underwater before a wave breaks on the surface. The brain was preparing the body long before any movement happened. Kornhuber and Dicke measured the movement and the brain signal, but they never asked the person what they were feeling. That was the gap Libet saw. Libet added one revolutionary ingredient: a clock. He placed a dot of light rotating on an oscilloscope face in front of each participant, like a second hand sweeping around a bare dial. The instruction was simple. Flex your wrist whenever you feel like it. And when you notice the urge to move, remember where the dot was on the clock at that exact moment. The results were stunning. The readiness potential in the brain started about 550 milliseconds before the wrist moved, but participants reported feeling the urge only about 200 milliseconds before movement. That is a 350 millisecond window where the brain was already committed to the movement and the person had absolutely no idea. That single gap made this the most controversial experiment in modern neuroscience. And that gap was just the beginning. Because 25 years later, a team in Berlin decided to push the question even further. John Dylan Haynes and his team at the Max Planck Institute put volunteers inside fMRI scanners and gave them a beautifully simple task. Press either the left or right button whenever you feel like it. There was one extra instruction. Watch the clock on the screen above you, and when you press the button, remember which letter was showing. That letter marks the moment you consciously decided. Meanwhile, the scanner was recording everything. Every flicker of blood flow across the prefrontal and parietal cortex, regions that sit near the top of the brain's decision-making hierarchy. Using pattern decoding algorithms, the researchers found something staggering. The brain activity alone could predict which button the person would press up to 7 seconds before they consciously chose. And fMRI is slow. The bold signal, which tracks blood oxygen, lags behind actual neural firing by several seconds. Accounting for that delay pushes the real prediction window to perhaps 10 seconds. Libet showed consciousness arriving late. Haynes showed it might be arriving as a readout of a decision already fully assembled somewhere upstream, in the dark, without you. But in 2012, a neuroscientist named Aaron Scherger looked at that readiness potential and asked a question nobody had thought to ask. What if it is not a signal at all? What if the readiness potential is not the brain preparing to act, but a statistical ghost, an artifact that only appears because of how Libet averaged the data? Here's the idea. Your brain is never quiet. It crackles constantly with random electrical noise, neurons firing and misfiring in every direction. Scherger proposed an accumulator model. That noise drifts up and down randomly until, by chance, it crosses a threshold, and that crossing triggers movement. When you time-lock hundreds of those noisy trials to the moment of movement and average them together, the random fluctuations cancel out. What is left, rising cleanly, is the readiness potential. This does not hand free will back to you, but it does destroy the clean story. Brain decides, you comply. The readiness potential may be measuring noise, not intent. And then there is the other problem. Every critic of Libet points to the same awkward fact. Flicking your wrist on a whim is nothing like choosing a career. Nothing like forgiving someone who hurt you. Those are habits, reflexes, impulses. Libet knew the difference. And that difference is what stopped him from burning his own results. He proposed something elegant and strange. He called it free won't. Not the freedom to initiate an action, but the freedom to stop one already in motion. The window is narrow, roughly 150 to 200 milliseconds between when consciousness registers an urge and when the body commits. A sliver of time to say no. In Libet's own experiments, some subjects reported doing exactly this, feeling the urge rise, then consciously suppressing it before acting. The veto was real and measurable. But critics immediately spotted the trap. If the veto itself is an action of the brain, then something must have caused that veto too. The readiness potential problem does not vanish, it doubles. So we hit the real question, not whether free will exists, but where in the brain-mind system the self actually lives. Is it in the signal that fires first, or in the awareness that watches it rise? Maybe the self is not the spark. Maybe the self is the veto. The part of you that watches the impulse, weighs it, and decides whether to let it through. That veto is real. Neuroscience has never disputed it. What Libet found was a gap between initiation and awareness, not proof that choice is fake. So here is the sharpest version of the question. Not whether you decide, but what part of you is doing the deciding. Position 1. Consciousness is an illusion. The brain decides, plays the movie of awareness after the fact, and you are simply the audience believing you are the director. Position 2. Consciousness is the veto editor. It does not write the first draft, but it has genuine power to reject it before it reaches the world. Position 3. Consciousness is the meaning maker. It may arrive late to the action, but it is the only thing that turns a nerve firing into a story you can live by. None of these three positions has won. The neuroscience is real, the readiness potential is real, but the interpretation is still genuinely open. What neuroscience has actually done is not kill free will. It has forced us to ask a more precise question about what kind of thing you are. Remember the lab in 1983? The wrist, the clock. The moment a person watched their own awareness arrive late to the party, their brain had already started. That gap between brain and awareness did not erase the self. It revealed something stranger and more interesting. The self is a process, not a moment. The clock is still on the screen. The dot is still spinning. The question of who is watching it is the most important one you will ask today. If this video moved something in you, subscribe and follow the next one.